Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of the Pretend GM Fantasy Football Show. I'm Alfredo Brown, and today I want to take you guys through my fantasy football draft roadmap. I've been looking at this all summer, studying ADP, seeing what draft tendencies are, where players are going, and how it correlates to my rankings. And I think I've come up with a really good roadmap, but I want to see how that works when I put it into an actual draft. Let's get started. So today what I'm going to do is take a look at my fantasy draft roadmap, which is something I'm going to be adding into the Pretend GM Fantasy Draft Guide, which you guys can get over at pretendgm.com. I'll also have the link in the description and in the pinned comment below this episode, so make sure you get your copy today. But something I want to look at is how I want to attack drafts. We have a good idea of what drafts will look like when we get there. Now, things will change and we need to be fluid. And you guys are going to see me do a mock draft live where I don't have time to think about the picks all that much. You're going to see me tilt here live on air, make decisions that I regret, and do my best to try to follow the plan that I have here in front of you guys. But it's not always that easy when things change in your draft. You can say that you want to draft certain positions early and then it doesn't happen. Spoiler alert, I did not follow my plan here to a T. I had to adjust as the draft went on. Some picks I ended up liking more than I thought, and others not so much. But you guys are going to see that here. Before we do that, I want to talk to you about what my fantasy draft roadmap is. Now, in rounds one and two, I want to double tap running back as often as I can. It depends on where you're at. It gets really difficult, and you'll see what happens in this draft because I put myself right in the middle of the draft at pick 6, where it does get a little more challenging to do that. At the front end of the draft or the back end of the draft, those are the best spots to double tap running back, especially that back end. I've found myself drafting towards the back of drafts a lot. Picks 9, 10, 11, 12. Those are the best places to double up on running back. So those of you that are drafting there, that's what you want to do from that spot. After rounds 1 and 2, when you get into rounds 3 through 7, this is where I've been saying grab as many of these upside wide receivers as you can and get your running back 3. The problem with what happens in drafts is that there are so many fantasy analysts in the industry now that are very sharp. Drafters are also getting sharp. And what happens is that ADP on a lot of these fantasy platforms are driven by the rankings that the fantasy experts and analysts make. Drafters will see those rankings, draft players at a certain spot, and all of a sudden, players are moving up and down in ADP. So there's not as many values as there have been in previous years. So the idea of saying, I'm going to follow this plan to a T doesn't exactly work. Wide receivers that were available in round 3 just a couple weeks ago are now moving into round 2. Running backs that I thought could be available at a certain round are going even earlier. So rounds 3 through 7 ideally is where I've been wanting to grab these upside wide receivers and the running back 3 option for my team. Once I get to round 8 through 11, this is where you just see what value falls to you, but I want to find my late round tight end and my late round quarterback. This is where I think you can get the best values in drafts. And then lastly, rounds 12 through 18, this is where I want to go all high upside picks. These are handcuff running backs, handcuff wide receivers. Yes, that's a real thing. And players that could see themselves getting a lot of volume in the right situation. These are players that could be traded, players that are now being thrust into new roles because of injuries ahead of them. And what could their role be even as a backup now if the starter does happen to miss time? These are all things that you want to take into consideration. There are no, whatever we want to call them, AI bots drafting in this one. These are all real people, all people that follow me on Twitter. So they're going to know my draft strategies. And you see it happen pretty quick. In the first pick, I time out because I'm trying to talk and I'm trying to get everything set up. So you're going to see the chaos of what happens with a 30-second clock and trying to explain all of the picks. So without any further ado, here you go. Here's the mock draft trying to use my fantasy football draft roadmap. We're going to start the mock draft here. I've got my split screen going where I've got the draft on one side. I've got my FantasyPros Draft Assistant on the other side. We're going to go ahead and start the draft. I'm drafting from the 6th spot because honestly, it seemed like the least fun place to start from. Underway. We're going to have everyone getting 30 seconds to pick here. And what I want to do is see if I can actually pull off the strategy I'm talking about, where I want to focus on running backs early, try to hit wide receivers through rounds 3 through 6. But if everyone else is also doing those same things, it may not work. And so that's the thing where I try to look at, okay, ADP says I can do one thing. But when I get in a real draft, is everyone else going to follow ADP? Is that how this is going to work out? And oftentimes it doesn't. So right off the board, we see Jahmyr Gibbs go 101, Bijan Robinson 102, Jamar Chase 103. Everything is just as expected. But now when you get to pick 4, this is where you're going to start to see people doing different things. We got 8 more seconds left on this pick. And I think you can expect some combination of Puka, CMC, Jonathan Taylor, and maybe one of the top wide receivers. Of course, we get our first auto draft timeout on the 104 pick, and it ends up being Christian McCaffrey. After that is Puka Nacua. So now I'm here at the 106, and my idea has been I want to take running backs early and often. However, Fantasy Pros Draft Assistant, even with my own rankings, say, let's go ahead and take one of these wide receivers that are here earlier, which does seem a little off to me because of the strategy that I want to take. Now, I can also even try this on upside mode and see how that changes things. What I want to do is time out, apparently, because that's what I do. We're going to go Amon-Ra St. Brown. And let's see what happens when you do go wide receiver early. That's what I ended up doing here. This is my fault for talking through this whole damn thing. So there we go. Amon-Ra St. Brown in the first round. Let's see what happens when I'm not able to do my running back early strategy. After that, we get Jonathan Taylor off the board, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and there are 4 picks left here. What I ended up doing here with Amon-Ra St. Brown is I went for safety. I wanted a guy who has consistently been a top 4 wide receiver. I know what I'm getting here in the first round, even though it's not running back. Now, I haven't drafted a lot from the 6th spot, right in the middle of the round. Everything tells me I should be able to get a running back that comes back to me here in the 2nd round, but I also don't want to let myself get stuck in that strategy. This is why I always talk about people asking, hey, do I need to go running back? Do I need to go wide receiver, running back? What happens if I go tight end? And I just say, let yourself be fluid. Let that draft come to you. And we're seeing what happens now when the draft actually does have to come to me. So only 4 wide receivers off the board here. And so I may regret going wide receiver early with how many running backs are starting to come off this board. It does seem like draft tendencies and ADP are starting to match. We get Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, James Cook, Ashton Jincy, and Chase Brown, all coming off the board here in the first round. Then at the turn, it's CeeDee Lamb and Derrick Henry. Now, I didn't expect Derrick Henry to be one of these guys that would go that early, especially ahead of Justin Jefferson. But it just shows you once you get into the draft, you don't know what's going to happen. Running backs do seem like they are going at a premium. And unfortunately, it looks like I might miss out on one of these top running backs. I did not expect it to go this way and to go this bad. This is also kind of the downside of trying to do a podcast while drafting at the same time. I love the running backs that you see here on the turn. And that's been one of my favorite places to draft. If you are in a draft where you can actually choose where you're going to be, I love drafting either early or late on those ends because that's where you're getting some of the best running back values. Okay, I'm back on the board here. There are none of the running backs that I want. Omarion Hampton goes off the board just before I can take him. So now I'm sitting here saying, okay, do I take Brock Bowers or one of these wide receivers? And I'm going to take Brock Bowers. This is a build I have not done yet. Amon-Ra St. Brown and Brock Bowers, but I'm pretty happy with it so far because I do have 2 guys that could both legitimately be top 5 in receptions in the NFL. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of the best offenses in the league. Vegas has them at the highest implied point total. Brock Bowers and the Raiders, not so much. But Brock Bowers, we saw target leader in his first season as a rookie, one of the top targeted players as a rookie, and then injury took him down in the 2nd year. So we didn't quite get to see him actually take off and be the guy we wanted to. So getting him here in the 2nd still feels like it can be a great building block for my team. Now, after all those running backs go off the board, we're starting to see people change their tune a little bit. After that, after my pick of Brock Bowers at the 207, we see A.J. Brown at the 208, Josh Allen at the 209, Nico Collins at the 210, Jeremiah Love at the 211, and then Drake London at the 212 turn. Now, what I'm looking at when I see all of the best players available, and I'll try to be smarter here and get more players into my queue, is that there are still some really good wide receivers, and it's just so hard to not take these guys. And I'm seeing Devontae Smith and Chris Olave come off the board here, and I'm realizing I kind of hate the fact that I went wide receiver and tight end early. Here I am stuck now in round 3, no running back to my name, and Trey McBride comes off the board. By the way, I'll do a quick recap here. Devontae Smith at 301, Chris Olave 302, George Pickens at 303, and then Trey McBride at the 304. The 305 is on the clock right now. I'll be up next, and if I wanted to go running back, I'd be picking between Kyren Williams, Josh Jacobs, Breece Hall, Javonte Williams. Now, Rashee Rice comes off the board. So I can pick one of these running backs, and I should be okay at running back going forward. However, I also see Malik Neighbors here at this pick, the 306, and he would be my top player by my rankings. Now, for the build's sake, let's go with Kyren Williams just so I can have a top player at the running back spot and not get locked out. Actually, you know what? It's draft season. Let's go nuts. Malik Neighbors at the 306. This is a player who should be a first round pick. Honestly, this is kind of the mental trap. And I wanted to do this where you guys can see what it's like behind the scenes, where we get into this mental trap saying, but I need a good running back, right? You don't actually. What you need is to have a lot of players that score a lot of points each week. Running back can be figured out. And if you find yourself in one of these builds where you no longer have great options at running back, you can still just keep taking best player available. As I look at my roster and I see Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brock Bowers, and Malik Neighbors to start this off, I'm really, really happy with the value I have from these 3 players. 3 guys that I think could all be top 10 in the NFL in targets and receptions. Now, building that through the first 3 rounds, it makes me feel good. I'll have to catch up at running back somehow, some way. There are some values later that I like. So after my pick at the 306, it's Kyren Williams off the board to a team with a 3 running back build, which I do like that as well. Then Javonte Williams at the 308, Garrett Wilson at the 309, Zay Flowers all the way down to the 310. And that's, I think, a steal right there at the 310 for the team that starts with Ashton Jeanty, Saquon Barkley, and then Zay Flowers is the wide receiver 1 for that team in the 3rd round. I love the build they have going on there. After that, it's Breece Hall at the 311, and we're back at the turn. So looking at what I could do in the 4th round, I'm hoping that maybe Josh Jacobs falls to me. I see Emeka Egbuka here available, Ladd McConkey available. Travis Etienne becomes a little bit more interesting to me. Josh Jacobs just went off the board, as well as Colston Loveland there at the 3-4 turn. Travis Etienne becomes a little more interesting because Alvin Kamara is dealing with an injury that could keep him out for up to the next month or more. Older player dealing with a soft tissue injury, and I'll get the exact wording on that. I'll have to take a look at that here as I'm talking to you guys, but Alvin Kamara suffered an MCL injury in practice Tuesday that will sideline him for at least the next month. Now, granted, the Saints have guys like Kendre Miller, Devin Neal that could all fill into these roles, but Travis Etienne becomes infinitely much more valuable than he was just a week ago. So if I can add now Travis Etienne here in the 4th round, that is great because I have a guy who could be flirting with top 12 running back upside in this improved offense. Now, after that turn with Loveland and Jacobs, we saw Waddle, Ladd McConkey, Ted McMillan, Cam Scatterbo, T. Higgins. So guess what? I'm back at my pick, and I get to choose now between Lamar Jackson, Emeka Egbuka, Travis Etienne. Everything in my body tells me I want to go with Egbuka, but he's also dealing with injury. So let's take Travis Etienne, a guy who could have top 12 upside now with Alvin Kamara being out. So I'm going Travis Etienne here at the 407, and I'm really enjoying the build that I have now. Once again, I'll just remind you, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brock Bowers, Malik Neighbors, Travis Etienne. This feels good. I feel comfortable going into my league, going into week 1, and feeling like I have a good chance to win this league now with this build. It looks like I'm not one of the only teams that have this many receivers and is low at running back, so I'll probably be fighting with some others, especially the team that's at 105 right now, the 5th pick. They've got Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, Rashee Rice, and Emeka Egbuka. Even that, without a running back, it feels great. That looks like a really good team that'll be tough to contend with throughout the year. So I don't want to get into this idea where I say, okay, first 2 rounds, I have to take running back. I know I'm repeating that, but I'm going to repeat that because I want us to stay fluid in these drafts. After my Travis Etienne pick at the 407, I see Emeka Egbuka at the 48, Quinshawn Judkins, the 409, David Montgomery at the 410, and then Tyler Warren at the 411. We're going to be back on this turn here. And as the draft is going to come back around to me at the 5th, I see some names here that I could potentially add at running back. I really like DeAndre Swift, who I have a bit higher in my rankings. Luther Burden, I think, is interesting. Bucky Irving, a guy who I think we're kind of discounting him a little too much at this point. He just went off the board at the 412. So I'm hoping I can get one of those guys that can come back to me. I also think we're discounting TreVeyon Henderson a bit too much. Even in a down year where he didn't get to do as much, he was a rookie. We were disappointed. He was still an RB2. I'm perfectly fine drafting him as an RB2. Now, he's going to come with a lot of inherent risk, but that's also baked into his ADP. So you could see his ADP start to fall more and more and more as we get closer to draft season. Now, Bucky Irving and Luther Burden come off the board at the turn there. That's a team that now looks frankly amazing. Jahmyr Gibbs, Drake London, Devontae Smith, Bucky Irving, Luther Burden. That's drafted by my buddy, Dr. Vignesh Doraiswamy, who helped incorporate this injury report into the Pretend GM rookie guide. And I didn't realize it was him before I gave him a compliment. Vig, you suck, but your team looks great. After that, at the 501, Luther Burden goes 502, Lamar Jackson, 503, DeAndre Swift, and that sort of derails my running back hopes there. Roma Dunze goes off next. Now, I want to start taking a look at running back here, and I'll use the draft tool as well. Now, I can look at players like TreVeyon Henderson, Bashal Tutin. Do I want to take a risk with one of those guys, or do I want to go and look at some other players that I can add here, like Terry McLaurin, Jameson Williams, DJ Moore, Christian Watson? I have to ask myself, are the risks the same between those players and the running backs? Bashal Tutin comes off the board, and so maybe that kind of just swayed me a different direction here. I don't love this. And this sucks for podcasting, but it also sucks when you're in your draft and you're just saying, okay, I really don't know who to draft here. I'm going to take my chances with TreVeyon Henderson at this pick. I don't love it. Of course, I'm clicking the wrong screen. So TreVeyon Henderson's going to come off the board here for me in the 5th round. I really much rather would have preferred to have DeAndre Swift, Bucky Irving, Bashal Tutin at one of those spots, but the beauty of me recording this and not doing it live is that what I'm really hoping for is Jonathan Brooks to come back to me in the 6th round. So that way I can feel a bit more comfortable at running back. Do I have some risks? Sure. Running backs are all risks. And this is actually kind of the opposite of what I've been preaching all summer long. I'm drafting running backs in that dead zone that I don't like, but I wanted to see how this turns out. Do I end up liking this team a lot as we go through it? This goes back to that whole strategy of, yeah, we might have a roadmap that we want to follow, but once we actually get into the drafts, sometimes you got to toss the roadmap out. You can use it to get back on track, but sometimes there's just going to be a better way that you get forced to take. That road gets closed. You can't go running backs early, and you end up taking wide receivers early. Now, what could I have done differently to start this off? I probably could have gone James Cook, who I prefer over Jonathan Taylor. If I go James Cook in round 1, I'm probably looking at taking Brock Bowers the same way. So all I'm really doing is swapping out James Cook for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then in this round, in round 5, instead of TreVeyon Henderson, who am I looking at? Am I looking at maybe in the 4th round, instead of Etienne, I'm looking at Ibuka. So James Cook and Ibuka versus Amon-Ra St. Brown and Travis Etienne. It all depends on how I want to look at it there. I think it's a pretty even trade the way I'm looking at it right now. The 5th round, where I think I get the most queasy about my pick, is TreVeyon Henderson here. But if he hits, that's a league-winning pick, right? You don't lose your league because of a 5th round pick. So let's catch you guys up if you're listening and not able to see the screen here. After TreVeyon Henderson at the 506, it's Terry McLaurin at the 507, DJ Moore, Christian Watson, Jameson Williams, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams. We got a ton of wide receivers come off the board there because all these running back heavy teams are starting to add their wide receiver 2s and 3s, which, by the way, I just charted Matt Stafford for reception perception. And listen, he looked great. And the offense, for the most part, was making a lot of big plays. But that was kind of the thing. A lot of these were massive plays that some of them seem unsustainable. Devontae Adams had a lot of touchdown catches near the goal line. He's one of these guys that might be dropping a little bit in my rankings as I continue to dig into the Rams offense a bit more. But still getting him at the 512 as your wide receiver 2 feels good. Our team 112 here is going with all older guys. Henry, Jacobs, Adams, there can still be some value found in there. As we get into the 6th round, we see quarterbacks starting to come off the board. Drake May, Jaden Daniels. Someone went Tucker Kraft a little early here, which Tucker Kraft is one of these guys who has just fallen down the board for me. I'm trying to be a bit cognizant of the injury with Tucker Kraft, where he's falling in drafts, and seeing him go off in the 6th round here while there's still other good players, it doesn't jive with me. After that comes Joe Burrow at the 604, and I'm doing my best here to add players to my queue, and I'll try to call these players out as I'm adding them, just so that you guys have an idea. So in my queue, I did have Parker Washington. He goes off the board at the 606. So by the way, to catch you up, Joe Burrow, Jadarian Price, Parker Washington. Now I'm up at the 6-7. Don't. Here I get to choose between, I can go quarterback, Jalen Hurts, who has been a guy that I have been all about, or I can take another running back and go Jonathan Brooks. And that's exactly what I did. Jonathan Brooks, a guy who I'm comfortable taking in the 5th round, a guy who earlier in the season was going in the 8th round and 7th round, and has started to creep up because Chuba Hubbard is now dealing with a hamstring injury. So I potentially have 2 guys that are the RB1s for their team in Etienne and Brooks. While Henderson may not be the RB1 for his team, the upside is there for him to be an RB1 in fantasy. And also, kind of all it takes is for one Ramondre Stevenson fumble for everything to go TreVeyon Henderson's way. The same thing can be said the other way. TreVeyon Henderson misses some pass blocking assignments or makes a poor decision in a game, and all of a sudden, we're worried about him getting benched by Mike Vrabel. But this Patriots team, the way I look at Henderson is it's going to be different this year. They're not going to be in the lead as much. They want to speed up the pace of play. They won't be able to slow things down with the run. They're going to be in passing situations more. That's also what happens when you go out and you trade for AJ Brown. You're going to put yourself in these passing situations. Who's the better pass catching back and the more explosive back? TreVeyon Henderson. So to have him out there for the Patriots, it gives him more opportunity to make big plays in fantasy, which is why I'm okay taking him where I did. I'm doing a little bit of the copium here. I'm trying to justify my pick. I'm feeling a little bit better. Now, let me catch you guys up with the picks that came after this. After I went Jonathan Brooks to 607 and got my 3rd running back, we got Jaylen Warren, Brian Thomas Jr., Marvin Harrison Jr., and Carnell Tate. 3 wide receivers I think have a ton of upside. I've talked all offseason about how much I think that Brian Thomas has a bounce back. Carnell Tate can be a steal here in the 6th or 7th round. Marvin Harrison Jr., I'm worried about him in the offense, but once again, you don't lose your draft because of a 6th round pick, and he is this team's wide receiver 4. I think that's the right place to take him as an upside pick. And then as we get to Dr. Vig here on the corner, he's got that awesome team where he's got Gibbs, London, Devontae Smith, Bucky Irving, Luther Burden. He adds Harold Fannin at the 612. And I think just to troll me, he went with Ramondre Stevenson at the 701. So now that I'm in the 7th round, this is where I want to start looking at tight ends and quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts is still available for me in the 7th round, and I think that is an absolute smash pick if he falls to me here in just a few spots. Kyle Pitts is another guy that's going to be available or is available currently. We'll see if he falls. J.K. Dobbins, Sam Laporta, and Michael Wilson just went off the board. So I am 1 pick away from getting either Jalen Hurts or Kyle Pitts at this spot. I'm really hoping it's going to be Hurts, but this is the team that started off 4 wide receivers, 2 running backs. Not quite sure what they're going to do. They've been a little more of the wild card in this one, zigging while everyone else is zagging. And also, here we go. Mental brain fart here. I don't need a tight end. I don't need Kyle Pitts. Brock Bowers is already on my team, so I don't need to add him. And of course, Jalen Hurts goes off the board. So now my life is ruined. This is where a little bit of that panic starts to set in. If you get stuck here on a quick time clock, you don't know who to pick. Now, if I am looking at, boy, this is where, okay, we're going to do this just for the sake of the draft here, everybody. We are going to pause this draft and make sure that I can get the right pick for the podcast. Okay. When I am looking at these players, I'm seeing guys, Kyle Pitts, Chuba Hubbard, DK Metcalf. What I don't want to do is get stuck looking at ADP that's on the website. I want to look at my rankings. So going back to my rankings, seeing Tony Pollard, Chris Godwin, Rico Dowdle, Quentin Johnston, these are guys that are up at the top of the list. I can still wait for some of these other running backs. At quarterback, how do I feel? Caleb Williams, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott. I still feel like I can wait at quarterback. So let's take a look at the flex spots. And honestly, I don't love the picks that I can make here. And this is something that comes back to me. I could have taken Kyle Pitts at this spot. Instead, I took Brock Bowers early at the 207. That could have been any other receiver, Devontae Smith, Chris Olave. This is where you get a little bit of that buyer's remorse. So I'm going to hop back into this draft and honestly just be forced to make a pick that maybe I don't want. Right now I'm in between Chris Godwin and potentially Jordan Mason. Don't love it, but we're going to go Chris Godwin on this one and see how that works out for us here in the 7th round. Normally I would have taken Jordan Tyson or any one of these other players. Oh, of course, I got auto drafted because I timed out incorrectly. So let's switch that really quick before everyone freaks out here. And Chris Godwin is now on the team. Okay. We are back off auto pick. This is such a nightmare to try to record and do a mock draft at the same time. Okay. Looking at the team we've got here, it's going from top to bottom in terms of positions. Travis Etienne, Trevion Henderson, Amon St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, Brock Bowers, Jonathan Brooks, Chris Godwin. Feeling really good about the passing volume that this team can get. And that's always going to be the biggest thing that's talked about, whether it's tight end, running back, wide receiver, is what kind of volume can they get? This team can get a ton of volume, and there's a lot of upside. Is there some inherent risk with a lot of these players? Sure. But there's also a lot of volume here and a lot of upside. So I'm willing to take those risks, especially as we get later into the draft. Now, what I want to do is let's queue up some players so we don't keep running into the auto draft scenario where we have to change things. Looking ahead, I still like Josh Downs despite the signing of Keenan Allen. Looking at some of the other flex players that are on here, I don't need Kyle Pitts. I don't want Chuba Hubbard. I don't want Jordan Tyson. Why don't I look at the Fantasy Pros Draft Assistant and see where it's going to help me here? There's Blake Corum. There's Rashad White. There's Kyle Monangai, Quentin Johnston, Stephon Diggs, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. And I think that's where I might throw in some of these cues to Jordan Mason. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt just came off the board, so I missed out on him. Rashad White, Kenneth Gainwell. These are some good upside plays that I'm stashing for later. Jonah Coleman. I can get all these guys into my queue so that I'm ready to draft them when I want them. Looking at the wide receivers, using the Fantasy Pros Draft Assistant, Quentin Johnston is dealing with an injury right now, so I want to be careful with drafting him, but Wan'Dale Robinson, Casey Concepcion, and Jalen Coker are all guys that I really, really like, and I can set them up in my queue as well. So Wan'Dale, Casey Concepcion, and I had talked about someone else, Jalen Coker, who's a little bit further down. This is why you don't want to let ADP decide when and where you're drafting. Jaden Higgins is another guy. Going to have to watch the injury updates with him as well because he had a lower leg injury in practice. Now, taking a look at quarterback, because more of them are starting to come off the board. Justin Herbert comes off the board here in round 8. I might be inclined to take Caleb Williams. He keeps falling to the point where it's just going to be a value for me at where he's going in round 8. Most of the time I've seen Caleb Williams go a little bit higher, round 6, round 7 at the latest. So to see him drop to round 8, this could also happen. Fantasy drafters are getting smarter. ADP is being adjusted by the rankings being made by experts or analysts, whatever we want to call them. And a lot of those analysts are taking quarterbacks later and later. So I think I'm at the point where I kind of have to take Caleb Williams to make sure I have myself a top tier quarterback. And I'm doing that here in round 8. I'm going to move Caleb to the top of my queue. And of course, because I'm talking about Caleb Williams, I'm going to guarantee that pick 6 here in round 8 is going to take Caleb Williams before I can get him, because that's exactly how this has gone. And he's got 3 seconds left. 3, 2, 1. Oh, Trevor Lawrence. There we go. So here we go, kids. We're taking Caleb Williams, going to add him. Now, there is also something here where I will say at quarterback, you don't have to panic and try to take someone just because you see other people taking them. We've seen now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 quarterbacks go in a span of roughly 2 rounds, in a span of like 24 picks here. That becomes the run on quarterbacks. So you have to ask yourself, do I want to be at the beginning of that run, the end of that run, or just avoid it altogether? Because there is good quarterback value later. I love grabbing Malik Willis later in drafts, Tyler Shuck later in drafts, Kyler Murray later in drafts. These are all guys that I'd be very comfortable with. But in this instance, The value for me was too good with Caleb Williams falling to the the eighth round, behind Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence. Now, after that, Chuba Hubbard, Quentin Johnston, Dak Prescott come off the board. I'm going to reset back to now I can just look at all flex positions, right? I can take a look at who are the best flex plays that are going to be available for me. I've got some guys already lined up in my queue. I'm going to avoid Jordan Tyson right now because of injury. I'm going to avoid Mekhi Lemon right now because of the injury. Monangai, injury as well. There are a lot of these players I want to avoid. Do I want to start taking some insurance policies? Blake Corum. Do I want to add, keeping going down the list? I mean, I love having Kenny Gainwell in my queue. Jacoby Myers is one of those players that he's here right now. I like him, especially in fantasy, but I think you always know that the upside is going to be a little capped. Now, it depends on what I'm looking. And it's very similar to Chris Godwin, if I'm being real. Good volume guy that may not have the same upside that I'm looking for. But if he's going to be my wide receiver 4, I'm willing to entertain that idea here of Jacoby Myers. So I'm going to get him into my queue as well. And I want to move him up a bit. So now looking at the queue, and if I go based on the Fantasy Pros Draft Assistant, which it looks like here what it does when you go to upside mode, it's going to adjust those rankings ever so slightly to put some other guys higher, and it's moved guys like Jacoby Myers down. So I'm going to follow what the Draft Assistant is telling me here. It's telling me to take Alec Pierce or Michael Pittman. I don't want to take either of those guys. However, it is also telling me to take Wan'Dale Robinson. Jacoby Myers is next up at a 1%. And then looking at the flex, we're looking at Blake Corum. And I think that's actually where I'm going to go. It's between Blake Corum and Rachaad White. And if Blake Corum falls to me here at pick 906, it feels hard not to take him, especially after seeing Jonah Coleman come off the board here at the 904 and then Kyle Monangai at the 905. Yeah, this is where I think I'm ready to take Blake Corum. This is absolute league-winning upside from a player. Getting that in the 9th round, this is exactly what you want to do when you get into this area. Who can win me my league? Not who's going to get me 7 points every week. Who can actually win me my league if they get the role that we need them to get? So I'm going to go with Blake Corum here in the 9th round. Just after that, Wan'Dale Robinson comes off the board at the 907, and I'm still looking at a lot of the same players I already had in my queue: Rachaad White, Kenny Gainwell, Jacoby Myers, Jalen Coker, Jaden Higgins. Now I look around at some of these tight ends and I also start to tell myself I could have had some really good tight end value. So it makes me a little bit not bothered, but I do get a little bit of that buyer's remorse thinking, okay, I went Brock Bowers super early here. He needs to pay off as a tight end that catches so many more passes than everyone else that it helps me win my league. Because if he's just good and not great, it didn't give me the advantage I needed at that premium position at tight end. Because seeing George Kittle available in the 9th round, Jake Ferguson, another guy who I really like here, who's probably going to be available in the 10th or 11th round, Dalton Kincaid, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Dallas Goedert. There's still such good tight end value available late. And that's typically what I like to do, is either go great tight end early or value tight end late. Let's see if the early tight end ends up paying off for me. A bunch of the guys that were in my queue just came off the board. Wan'Dale Robinson at the 9.7, Michael Pittman at the 9.08, Kenny Gainwell at the 9.09, Jalen Coker at the 9.10, Dejon Stribling at the 9.11. You could tell that a lot of people in this draft also follow the work that I do, and that's always typically the hardest thing too, is when you're drafting with people that know you and know your tendencies, they're going to take a lot of these players that you really like. Now, looking around, this is where I just want to keep shooting for upside, shoot for upside everywhere I'm going. This is where I'm going to grab. I'm going to put Alec Pierce in my queue. Now, normally I'm not advocating for drafting Alec Pierce, but it's the 10th round. I'm willing to do that. Rachaad White just came off the board. Jordan Tyson came off the board. This is where I think you're going to start to see some of these players that have injury concerns or people are worried about come off the board, because this is upside time. This is where you want to look for this. So I've got Jacoby Myers, Jaden Higgins, and Alec Pierce all in my queue. I'm going to move Alec Pierce to the top. Alec Pierce, the guy who I have drafted 0% of. I have loved Josh Downs all throughout the process. I have loved Tyler Warren all throughout the process. But now Keenan Allen being added muddies up those waters ever so slightly. I still love, I'm in for the Josh Downs party. But Alec Pierce is going to be the only guy left on this roster that can actually stretch the field and do something different. If he doesn't play a down of football this year, it doesn't kill me. This is the 10th round. Take the swing. If Alec Pierce is close to what he was last year, once again, another league winning pick to take in the 10th round. Do I think he could fall to me in the 11th? Maybe, but I'm willing to take this shot right now. Alec Pierce, 10th round. Here we go. Just added him to the roster. And I'll catch you guys up for those of you listening. Here in the 10th round, it was Rachaad White, Jordan Tyson, Jordan Addison, Isaiah Likely coming off the board, Jackson Dart, Matthew Golden, and then I went Alec Pierce. Now, when I look at my roster, remember too, this is only a 2 wide receiver roster. So I got Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, and then Chris Godwin as my wide receiver 3, and then Alec Pierce as my wide receiver 4. I am perfectly okay with that. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 running backs as well. And I've got my quarterback and tight end set up. From here on out, all I want to do is hit running back and wide receiver over and over and over to get high upside plays. So looking at what we have available in the Fantasy Pros Draft Assistant, Dylan Sampson is a guy that's going to be available. Marshawn Lloyd is a guy that I want to add to my queue. I've loved Marshawn Lloyd since coming out of USC. His problem is staying healthy. Emmett Johnson, another high upside handcuff. And this is what I want to do. I want to start grabbing as many of these handcuffs as possible. Mike Washington is another guy who comes off my memory here that I want to add to the queue. And I'll keep scrolling down. Yep, he's already right there in the Fantasy Pros Draft Assistant. I'm also seeing names like Rashid Shaheed, George Kittle, Xavier Worthy, Tyjae Spears, Zach Charbonnet, Dylan Sampson. These guys are all here. Let me take a look at receiver because we got Xavier Worthy, Deebo Samuel, Khalil Shakur, Keenan Allen, Trey Tucker. Oh, I love Malik Washington. I think that can be a solid play for Miami this year. He could be a guy that soaks up a lot of targets in an offense that could be really limited, but I don't want to take him just yet. I'm going to allow everything to keep playing out as it should. And right now, what's left in my queue is Marshawn Lloyd, Emmett Johnson, Mike Washington, and Malik Washington. So upside, upside, upside at this point. I do start to ask myself, George Kittle has now fallen to round 11. Do I want to grab him here? Do I consider it? I don't need the tight end, but is there a point where he's actually better than some of the wide receivers or running backs I could get? And then I can start him in the flex spot if he's good and if he's healthy. I think I want to try this out. George Kittle, round 11, instead of getting a handcuff running back. Let's see what happens, boys and girls. So George Kittle is now on the roster. We're doing a lot here. We're risking a lot in these late rounds, but that's how I want to draft. That is how I want to play, because if George Kittle is his typical tight end 3 or tight end 4 self, that's going to be more valuable than drafting wide receiver 50 or 60 off the board here, especially in a roster format, I should say, where it's 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and 2 flex. I can flex George Kittle into this lineup if I need to. I don't expect that I'll have to take Amon-Ra St. Brown or Malik Neighbors out of the wide receiver spots. Travis Etienne will be locked into the RB1 spot. Brock Bowers is locked into the tight end spot. So really, it's going to be me every week figuring out who are my 2 flex players and who's my RB2 every week. And depending on what we see, if Jonathan Brooks is the lone starter in Carolina, he'll probably be my RB2. And then I'll be figuring out the flex spot between Trevion Henderson, Chris Godwin, George Kittle, Alec Pierce. That's just one spot that I get to figure out between them. And if Trevion Henderson ends up being the last guy to make my starting lineup every week, I feel pretty good about that. I can also just wait to see what happens with George Kittle as he ramps up his snap share, especially because he was my 11th round pick. I'm going to keep harping on that, man. This is what we want to do as you get later in drafts. And I'm seeing that here with the 12th team, who over the last 3 rounds, they went backup running back, backup running back, backup running back. Tyler Algier, Rachaad White, Marshawn Lloyd. Then they go for the upside pick. I don't love the player, but Xavier Worthy here. Tyjae Spears comes off the board. This is where we're going to see all the handcuffs coming off the board. And I'm a big fan of taking other handcuffs, not necessarily your own. You don't get a lot of added value to your team by taking your own handcuff. All you do is get a potentially worse version of the player you already had. Now imagine you have your starter and someone else's starter. That's what separates your team and makes your team one of the best in the league, not losing value on your own player. So we are 2 picks away. Dontavian Wicks and Zach Charbonnet just came off the board. Looking at my queue, this is where I want to start to add my 2 favorite rookie handcuffs, Mike Washington Jr., Emmett Johnson. These are 2 guys that I will be trying to add in as many drafts as possible. Also, just for the heck of it, too. Oh man, there's still some decent players here too. You're hearing me do all the thoughts out loud. Woody Marks is still available. He just went off the board, so never mind. But Dylan Sampson's available. There's also Ray Davis, Jaden Blue. There's a lot of these guys. And the thing that I want to look at here, though, is who gives me the most value if they do get into action, right? It's not going to be Dylan Sampson because he'll have to split the backfield with someone else. I'm going to go Mike Washington in this case because I think if he takes over for Ashton Jeanty, we're looking at a guy who is a league-winning running back at that spot. He'll be a lot like Zach Charbonnet in the last few years, a guy who's catching passes, getting goal line work, and running as a top 15 running back every week. If I'm getting that in round 12, he's my running back. What is he? He's my running back 5 on my roster behind Henderson, Brooks, Corum, and Washington. This is the way I want to build if I missed out on running back early. Go all high upside running backs here, not safe running backs, high upside guys that can eventually match what I could have had in earlier rounds by going running back with some of those earlier picks. Now, after Malik Washington Jr. comes off the board at my pick, it goes Khalil Shakir, Jalen Naylor, Tank Bigsby. And honestly, I just don't love drafting receivers this late. You don't really get a lot added to your team by going receiver this late in the draft, unless that player vastly outperforms their ADP. And that's the thing I'm looking at here. There's not a lot of receivers that I love, and I'll show you guys both on the Fantasy Pros Draft Assistant and on the Sleeper queue here. There's not a lot of receivers that I look at that could vastly outperform their ADP. I mean, I like Tank Dell, and I'm rooting for him. I don't know that we see a massive production in a roster that is crowded with players. Jalen McMillan could be good, but he's been injured often throughout his career, and he's injured currently with Ted Hurst just nipping at his heels, ready to go in. That's the other thing. I can take an injured Alec Pierce because no one's trying to take his role. Jalen McMillan might actually just lose his role to Ted Hurst. Some other wide receivers that are here that could potentially outkick their ADP. Trey Tucker, who's showing up here in the Fantasy Pros tool. So I'm going to put him in my queue. Adonai Mitchell, who all the reports have been that he has looked great. Kenyon Sadiq has not been participating in camp because of an injury. Omar Cooper Jr. has not looked great, which is disappointing. I think he'll probably just take some time to get going. And then as I look around, there's maybe one more wide receiver that I like, 2 more wide receivers here. Ryan Flournoy, who is essentially the Dallas Cowboys handcuff receiver. Kayshon Boutte, who was so good last year for the Patriots, may get traded. Malachi Fields, that could kind of be the handcuff to Malik Neighbors. I don't really care about adding him to my team, but I am intrigued by that. And yeah, I don't think there's a lot of other wide receivers I'm interested, but I'm back up on the board, and this stinks because Emmett Johnson just got taken. So, okay, if I'm going to look at who I want to take, Dylan Sampson seems like the guy. And I don't love it. I really don't. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm going to pass on Dylan Sampson. And I'm going to go. Actually, oh, guys, you're watching me tilt right here live. Let's go Jaden Blue. Can't believe I did that, but here we go. Jaden Blue ends up being a guy that could have a massive role in Dallas if Javonte Williams, who has had injuries throughout his career, ends up not being able to play all 17 games. If Jaden Blue is a starting running back for the Dallas Cowboys in a pass-catching role, a pass-heavy team that is projected to be top 5 in fantasy points, or not fantasy points, but in points in the NFL this year, they have an extremely fast pace of play. I love being able to add that here in the 13th round. And we've got 3 more rounds after this, going to round 16. And this is where it looks like it's just going to be all backup running backs. After this, it's Trey Harris, Dylan Sampson, Nick Singleton, Alvin Kamara. And my queue actually, ironically, has plenty of wide receivers, but I'm going to start to look at some of these running backs that I want to add here. Jordan James is a guy I'm going to put into my queue as the backup in San Francisco. Braylon Allen, It's another guy who he'll probably be in the mix with Isaiah Davis. So I don't necessarily love him, but I want to have him in my queue. Kamani Vidal, I think, ends up becoming the primary backup if Amarian Hampton were to go down. And let's see, my queue just got a little bit shorter because Trey Tucker came off the board. So I'm fine with that. I think my goal will be on this next pick is to take Ray Davis here in round 14. So I have all the backup running backs. And then Malik Washington will likely be available for me here in round 15. And if he's not, I can go with any one of Adonai Mitchell, Kayshon Boutte, Ryan Flournoy, just to kind of fill out my wide receiver room a little bit more. But once again, just going to see how everything falls to me. I don't have to push for a wide receiver here. After Trey Tucker goes off the board, Jalen McMillan comes off the board, and I'm going to go back to my Fantasy Pros draft assistant. Adonai Mitchell is what the Fantasy Pros draft assistant is telling me is the top pick here. Keenan Allen is another guy that's all about safety if I'm adding him. And I don't really care about a safe pick. Oh, there you go. Malik Washington off the board here, round 14. So I missed out on him. But as much as I love Malik Washington this year as a value play, a guy's not a value play if you end up taking him around early. So he comes off the board here in round 14. So now I'm basically going to have my picks down to Ray Davis or Adonai Mitchell. So what helps me the most on this team? Is it going to be Ray Davis if James Cook were to miss time, or is it Adonai Mitchell if, let's say, Garrett Wilson were to miss time? Do I want the top receiver for the Jets or the RB1 for the Bills? In this instance, I'm going to go RB1 for the Bills. Now, I've added over the last 3 rounds Mike Washington Jr., Jaden Blue, and Ray Davis. Before that, the other running back I added was Blake Corum. That is 4 high upside contingency running backs that I would be really happy with rostering going into this season. Now, we're going back to this buyer's remorse on tight end. Jake Ferguson, a guy who I really like this year and I think is underrated once again. Every year with Dak Prescott, he has been a top 10 fantasy tight end in points per game. Every year that Dak Prescott has played a full season, Ferguson's been there. And he just came off the board here in round 14 to a team that already has 2 other tight ends. They don't even need him, but they're taking him just for the value. Tyler Shuck comes off the board here in round 14 as well. Kamani Vidal and Tank Dell. So this really reinforces the fact that I can wait on tight end. I can wait on quarterback. Malik Willis hasn't even come off the board, and that would have been the ideal pick for me late. But what I wanted to do was show you guys that, yeah, I can preach stuff, and as much as I want to practice it all the time, you simply can't because of the way that drafts go. Even when you're in a spot you don't like, ideally, I would have loved to take some of these guys later, right? Get George Kittle and Jake Ferguson in round 11 and 14, and those would have been my tight ends, and I would have absolutely loved that. Wait and get my quarterbacks late. Kyler Murray in the 14th round, Tyler Shuck in the 14th round, Malik Willis in the 15th round. Those would have been the quarterbacks I would have targeted instead of taking Caleb Williams early at pick 8. But when you get in the draft, things start to move around and you get worried, right? So these fantasy roadmaps are fun to try to follow. Sometimes you just can't. Now, I'm not normally an advocate of taking a second quarterback, but Malik Willis has top 12 upside with his rushing ability. I'm going to put him in my queue. Does not necessarily mean I'm going to draft him. However, I am going to consider him as he keeps falling here. I'm back on the clock after Bo Nix comes off the board as like quarterback 16 here. Adonai Mitchell's still on the board. So this hedge worked for me. I was able to take Ray Davis, wait for Adonai Mitchell to fall, and I'm going to go Adonai Mitchell here in round 15 as basically the Jets wide receiver handcuff. I don't want to have to start him, but also if this Jets defense isn't great and the team has to pass a lot, cool. I have a guy who could potentially work as my wide receiver 5 or 4 for fantasy this year in football. Fantasy in football. Yeah, I've been going too long here on the mock. After Adonai Mitchell, I see Kenyon Steak, Brenton Strange, Antonio Williams, Jordan James. This is where you're going to start to see people taking wild swings at just players you're like, oh, I would not have drafted that player. In my queue right now, I've got Kayshon Boutte, who I still think a trade is coming, and then Malik Willis. Now, a pick just happened here by Brian Hartman, Too Much Brian, who's at pick 11 here in the draft, and I love what he did. He went Terrence Ferguson as his tight end. Terrence Ferguson, who came off the board right now, I believe is like the tight end 17. That is his one and only tight end he has drafted. He might grab another one, but what this mock has shown me is that there's so much tight end value late. You can get these guys round 14, round 11. That's also where Juwan Johnson went, which I love that. But then to get Terrence Ferguson, who could be the breakout at tight end, right? That's what you want, is a guy who just absolutely crushes ADP at his position. Terrence Ferguson is a guy who's being drafted as tight end, typically tight end like 20. And he could be a top 12 tight end this year as the Rams' number 3 target. And then Brian follows up the Terrence Ferguson pick with Greg Dulcich as his second tight end, which I love both these guys as upside picks. I probably would have taken someone earlier. I probably would have gone with Juwan Johnson or George Kittle if I was going to go with these picks, or even where the way Jake Ferguson fell at 14. Now I'm back on the board. I'm looking at who could be available for me. I don't think I want to take Malik Willis. I'm not sure, guys. I think there are so many other quarterbacks that are still available between Love, Baker, Goff, Darnold, all these guys that are going to be on the waiver wire. I think I want to draft Kayshon Boutte here in case he gets traded, because he could be a big time ad for me. Excuse me. He would be a big time ad off the waiver wire if he gets traded and doesn't get drafted here. But to get him in round 16 as my wide receiver 6, I'm good with that. And in so many games last year, he was a wide receiver 3. He's got big play upside. He's a guy that can win deep. He catches touchdowns. We'll see what ends up happening there. I honestly would have thought that maybe Indy would have been a good spot for him. I'm not sure what other teams might actually be looking at Kayshon Boutte. Maybe we have something here on Twitter, and I'm going to look this up live to see if there's any report on who could be looking at Kayshon Boutte. I know Las Vegas was another team that was referenced as well, but I'm also looking here in camp. It does seem like Kayshon Boutte is having himself a great camp today, winning over Tariq Woolen in camp just an hour ago, winning over Eagles cornerback Quinyon Mitchell. There's a lot of big plays that are happening. Could that mean that he becomes a trade target? We'll find out. But to take that in round 16, I'm happy with it. And with this, the draft is finally over. So in round 16, we saw Keon Coleman, Greg Dulcich, Patrick Mahomes, Malik Benson, the rookie for Las Vegas, Jeremy Bernard, Jake Tonjes, Kayshon Boutte, Juwan Jennings, Ted Hurst, Malik Willis at the 16-10, which is a great quarterback to pair up with Dak Prescott. That's what that fantasy manager did. And then Adam Randall and Cooper Kupp. So the draft analysis of my team using my rankings is a B, an 85 out of 100 from the FantasyPros Draft Wizard. And honestly, that's kind of how I feel after doing my draft here. It feels like a B, an 85 out of 100. I wonder how it would have felt if I could follow my own strategy a bit more to the T. If I would have been in a spot where I could have gone running back early, if I would have maybe passed on tight end and let that fall a little later, pass on quarterback and let that fall a little later, but it didn't quite work out the way I wanted. Right now, this has me finishing as team, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5th in my league. Now, I'm also going to understand that too, that with a tool like this, it's going to look at, well, you got a lot of injured guys that aren't expected to play early in the season. However, if I can make things work off the waiver wire, which is what I always want to do, is pay attention to waiver wire, be able to make trades, and have these high upside guys, that's what's going to help me later on down the line. So let me recap my team for you guys as I look here over on Sleeper and on the Fantasy Pros Draft Assistant, just to show you guys. In round 1, I went Amon-Ra St. Brown. This was from the 6th pick in a 12-team half PPR league. At 106, I went Amon-Ra St. Brown over Jonathan Taylor, Jackson Smith-Njigba, or James Cook. At the 207, I went Brock Bowers over A.J. Brown, Nico Collins, Drake London. Bowers, as much as I say I wish I could have waited on tight end, at that spot, he felt like the right pick for me. And then in the 3rd round, 306, I went Malik Neighbors over Kyron Williams, Javonte Williams, Garrett Wilson, Zay Flowers, Breece Hall. I feel good about that one. Going back to round 4 now, I went Travis Etienne as my RB1 on my team. I chose him over Emeka Egbuka, Quinshon Judkins, David Montgomery, Tyler Warren, Bucky Irving. I feel good about this. I was hoping Luther Burden would fall to me in the 5th. He did not. So instead, I also wanted DeAndre Swift. Instead of Burden or Swift, I ended up with Travion Henderson. And that was a little uncharacteristic of me, and that sometimes happens when you get into drafts. You might do something uncharacteristic because you feel like you need to fit a mold for your team. And I don't know if there's another player I would have taken after him because of where everything fell. After Henderson, it's Terry McLaurin, who I'd rather have Henderson, DJ Moore. Maybe I'd take DJ Moore as my wide receiver 3, but I still think I lean the upside of Henderson. Christian Watson, who I really, really like. That's one that maybe I could have gone Christian Watson over Trevion Henderson, but Watson is still my wide receiver 25 in rankings. And then there's Jameson Williams. I also like him. Still my wide receiver 26. Mike Evans, currently injured. Devontae Adams, old. It's not an ailment, but he is. And then quarterbacks came off the board. So this was one of those times where I didn't love the pick I had to make, but it was kind of the best pick I could make at that spot, unless I reached at quarterback, which I didn't want to do. Then I get into round 6, Jonathan Brooks at the 607. I took him over Jalen Warren, Brian Thomas, Marvin Harrison Jr., Carnell Tate, and Harold Fannin. I am happy with that pick. I love that pick. Getting Brooks in the 6th round is exactly where I want to get him and exactly where he should be going, near guys like Jadarian Price and Bashal Tutin, Trevion Henderson, Jalen Warren, Ramondre Stevenson. That is exactly where Jonathan Brooks should be going in your draft. So if you see him fall to that area, it's time for you to take him. Going on to round 7, I took Chris Godwin as my wide receiver 3. This is wondering if Emeka Ibuka is going to be okay with the toe injury. He should, right? But we often don't get the best information from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and all I need Chris Godwin to do is be the wide receiver 3. I wanted a little bit of consistency here at my wide receiver spot. Are there other players that I think I maybe would have rather had? Potentially. I think this is one of those picks where I think I went too safe. I do like RJ Harvey, which I would have been okay there, but I don't know that I wanted a 4th running back. But once again, I'm letting the thoughts be out loud here. This is all behind the scenes. You don't need to fill positions. Just get good players. After that, it was Tony Pollard. I'd rather go Godwin. Metcalf. I'd rather go Godwin. Dowdle. I'd rather go Godwin. Krosky Merritt. He's fun, but I'd rather go Godwin. Jaden Reed is where I think I would have started to have these talks with myself. And Josh Downs. A week ago, Josh Downs was the easy pick in round 7 there. I'm going Josh Downs no matter what. Then Stephon Diggs, Justin Herbert, Courtland Sutton. I think I ended up with the right pick here with Godwin, even though I don't love it. And that's kind of what ends up happening rounds 5 through 7. There's not a lot of picks that I love there. As we go on, round 8, Caleb Williams was my quarterback pick in round 8. I think I could have waited at quarterback. Once again, this is just the buyer's remorse. Could have waited at quarterback in round 8. And I watched Caleb fall and I kept saying, you know what? I think I need to take him. And I could have just gone with any one of these other guys. Shuck, Nix, Murray, Willis, and I could have just built a quarterback out of there. With Caleb, though, I think I do have a guy that has top 3 fantasy quarterback upside, and that's something that I think you want to catch that if it's falling to you in round 8, especially 2 full rounds after Drake May, right after Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence. I think I got a good value at quarterback, but I don't love it, right? Typically, that's how it happens, man. The teams that you don't love end up actually being good for fantasy football. Round 9, I'll go a little faster through these. Round 9, Blake Corum at the 906. High upside, high contingency running back. I want this. Everywhere from here on out needs to be high risk, high upside. Because you know what? Half these players are going to be on your waiver wire by the time you get through week 6. So Corum at the 906. I took him over Wan'Dale Robinson, over Michael Pittman, over Kenny Gainwell, over Jalen Coker, over Dejon Stribling, and over Tyler Algier. I do not regret that pick one bit. Round 10, I take Alec Pierce, and I took Pierce over Dallas Goedert, Dalton Kincaid, Romeo Doubs, Keaton Mitchell, Jacoby Myers, and Aaron Jones. So I'm good with Pierce. I don't love that he's injured. I wouldn't be actively targeting him, but I'm good with him in the 10th round. If he can give me wide receiver 2 or 3 production like he did last year, I love this as my wide receiver 4 in the 10th round. George Kittle, I explained that earlier. He could be the guy that ends up being another flex play for me, because if he can return that tight end 3 or 4 overall value he did last year, then yeah, I'm going to plug that into my flex over a 4th running back or 4th receiver or whomever might enter my lineup at that time. After that, I went all backup running backs: Malik Washington Jr., Jaden Blue, Ray Davis in those 3 rounds. That's all I want to do is hammer at handcuff running backs, guys with massive contingent upside. After that, I went with 2 wide receivers with big play upside and potential contingent upside with Adonai Mitchell, who could be the handcuff wide receiver for the Jets if Garrett Wilson were to miss any time. Doesn't mean that it's a great play being the top wide receiver for the Jets, but it does work in an offense that is likely going to have to pass the ball a lot. And there's been rookies that are injured and players that simply just aren't available for big roles. After that final round here, 16-round mock draft, I took Kayshon Boutte to see what the upside value could be if he does get traded. A team that's going to trade for Boutte is going to want to use him week 1 at the X position or the Z, whatever fits in their wide receiver room. But to have that, a potential team's wide receiver 1 or 2 in round 16, I like that. And we'll see what ends up happening. If he gets stuck on the Patriots, that's going to kind of suck. But once again, I've said this many times, I'm not losing my draft because of a pick made here in round 16. So I'm going for straight upside at this point. I hope this was helpful for you guys to see what happens when you go into a draft with a plan and what ends up happening when you can't hold on to that plan. I know a lot of times people do mock drafts and they say, this is what I did, and they give out the perfect, well-oiled machine answer to why they made perfect picks. I wanted you guys to see this and experience it. What happens to me in a draft, my thought process, and how I end up making all these picks. It's honestly, it's the best way for us to relate to each other and to feel comfortable going into our drafts and how to be fluid. Let me know what you thought of this draft and each of the picks, where you agree, where you disagree, and what kind of strategies you want to be using in your drafts. That's going to be it for me today. As always, I want to thank you for watching or listening all the way through, and I'll see you next time. Adios.